Chapter 1. The holiest man I ever knew was standing 10 paces away, holding the silver blade he had used to cut my umbilical cord 20 years ago. Now, he was begging me to gut myself with it. "Take the blade, Lysandra," High Mage Malachor said. His voice didn't shake. It was devastatingly gentle. "End it before the dark wakes up." He tossed the dagger. It clattered against the jagged rocks, stopping inches from my ruined boots. Behind him, the church's mutant hounds didn't just snarl, they whimpered, their eyes rolling back as if the mere scent of me was giving them a seizure. I looked down at the blade. My hand twitched instinctively toward my stomach. 3 months. I hated the thing growing inside me. It wasn't a miracle. It was a parasite. A violent violation from an illusionary trap that had burned my entire life to ash. Every time I felt its unnatural pulse, a wave of profound, suffocating self-loathing washed over me. I wanted to claw it out. If it dies, good, I thought, the ugliness of it tasting like old copper in my mouth. I hope it dies with me. I hope we both rot. But then I looked at Malachor. I looked at his immaculate white robes, at the absolute untouchable purity of the man who had locked me in the dark. "You call it an abomination," I rasped, my voice cracking against the howling wind of the weeping abyss behind me. "Look up, Lysandra," Malachor said calmly. He pointed his glowing staff at the night sky. "The stars are dimming in the east. The holy wards around the city are weeping black oil. Your parasite is merely dreaming, and reality is already tearing at the seams." He took a slow step forward, his eyes filled with a terrifying, absolute clarity. "You think I want to do this? You think this is a test of faith? I am not murdering a daughter. I am euthanizing a cancer that will eat the world." He was right. That was the most terrifying part. He wasn't a fanatic screaming scripture. He was a surgeon holding a scalpel, acting out of pure, tragic logic. "Pick up the blade," he commanded softly. I didn't step back. I didn't drop to my knees and beg. A fractured, hysterical heat bubbled up in my chest. The logic in my brain simply snapped. I bent down and picked up the silver dagger. Malachor exhaled a heavy sigh of relief. "May the light forgive." I didn't aim for my stomach. I closed my bare fist around the sharp edge of the blade and yanked. The silver sliced deep into my palm. Corrupted, black-streaked blood welled up and dripped onto the sacred chalk of the cliffside. It hissed violently, burning the holy ground like acid. Malachor stopped breathing. "What are you doing?" I looked at him, my lips pulling back into an unhinged, bleeding smile. "Cleanse this," I whispered. Then I threw the bloody knife right at his face, crossed my arms tightly over my womb, and stepped backward into the abyss. Gravity violently ripped me from the ledge. Malachor's scream of pure, unfiltered horror was instantly swallowed by the void. The wind shrieked. Absolute crushing dark folded over me. Good, let it all burn. I waited for the terminal velocity to shatter my spine. I waited for the dark to claim us. Crack. The impact didn't break me. It swallowed me. Something massive snatched me out of midair, but it didn't feel like flesh and bone. It felt like plunging into a freezing, solid shadow. Claws with too many joints like broken human fingers stretched impossibly long pierced through my heavy robes, anchoring me against a chest that vibrated with a sickening frequency. There was no heartbeat. Instead, there was a mechanical, grinding hum like tectonic plates shifting under my ear. I couldn't see, but the smell was fundamentally wrong. Not animal musk, not a wolf. It smelled like burning ozone, dried marrow, and centuries of undisturbed, suffocating dust. My body convulsed in a violent, visceral rejection. I thrashed wildly, but the grip tightened. It didn't just hold me. The shadows seemed to bleed into my clothes, fusing us together. It didn't growl, it didn't breathe. A psychic weight slammed into my frontal lobe, hitting so hard a drop of blood immediately leaked from my nose. The intent wasn't a voice. It was a jagged, predatory image forced directly into my brain. My own blood on a black, unnatural tongue. Sweet. Rot. This wasn't an animal. This wasn't a rescue. I had just traded a holy executioner for a cosmic mistake. Mine. Keep. Chapter 2. The breathing woke me. It didn't sound like lungs pulling in air. It sounded like wet gravel grinding through a rusted iron pipe. I opened my eyes to absolute, suffocating darkness. My body was completely numb, except for a sharp, radiating ache in my left shoulder where the creature's unnatural claws had dug in during the fall. I was lying on something soft but deeply wrong. Shredded silk, damp earth, and hard cylindrical objects that felt sickeningly like old bones. A nest. It had dragged me into its nest. Crunch. The sound echoed off unseen stone walls. The snapping of marrow. I stopped breathing. I didn't move a single muscle. The heavy metallic stench of fresh blood washed over me, masking the smell of ancient dust. 2 amber lights flickered on in the dark, about 10 feet away. Not eyes reflecting light. They were emitting it. Sickly, fractured, and completely devoid of sanity. It dropped whatever it was eating. I heard the scrape of claws on stone. It was coming closer, but the rhythm was wrong. It didn't have the steady, predatory gait of a wolf or a bear. It dragged itself, its joints clicking and popping with a sickening, mechanical rhythm. "Don't run," I told myself. "If you run, you're meat." The beast stopped right beside me. The ambient heat radiating from its massive, twisted body was like standing next to an open furnace. It lowered its head. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the tearing of flesh. Instead, a rough, violently dry tongue dragged across my cheek. It tasted the dried blood from where the cliff had scratched me. A low, vibrating hum rattled deep in its chest. The sound physically vibrated through the stone beneath my spine. Then, it shoved its massive snout aggressively against my stomach. The parasite inside me reacted. A pulse of erratic dark magic flared in my womb. The beast violently jerked back. The hum turned into a jagged, ear-splitting hiss. It snapped its jaws at the empty air, the sound like 2 steel plates slamming together. The amber eyes flared wildly. It was confused. It could smell the heresy, the dark magic that mirrored its own corrupted nature, and it didn't know whether to protect it or tear it out of me. It loomed over me, shadows bleeding off its fur, shifting like smoke. It raised a massive, clawed hand. "It's going to kill me." Panic spiked, sharp and blinding. But right behind the panic was that cold, ugly instinct that had kept me alive in the church's dungeons. It's an animal, I realized. A broken, rabid thing. And what do broken things crave most? I didn't summon my light magic as a weapon. If I blasted it, it would rip my head off before the light even faded. Instead, I opened my hand and called upon the core of my holy power. I didn't ignite it. I let it pool in my palm. A soft, deceptively gentle golden glow. The warmth of a hearth. The feeling of absolute safety. A lie, shaped into light. "Look at me," I whispered. My voice shook, but I forced a sickeningly sweet, hypnotic lullaby into my tone. The beast froze. The glowing amber eyes locked onto my glowing hand. Caplay slowly reached up. It bared its jagged, yellowed fangs, a warning rumble shaking the cave. I didn't pull back. I pressed my warm, glowing palm directly against the side of its heavily scarred snout. The reaction was instantaneous, and it was pathetic. The beast flinched violently, as if expecting a blow. But when the holy warmth seeped into its freezing, corrupted skin, the snarl died in its throat. Its massive shoulders slumped. The terrifying monster let out a fractured, high-pitched whine that sounded horribly like a beaten dog. It leaned its heavy, deformed skull into my hand. I stared at the monster in the dim golden light of my own making. My heart was pounding with sheer terror, but a cold, calculating smile crept onto my lips. It was so easy. The church used light to burn. I was using it as a leash. That's right, I thought, running my fingers through the coarse, filthy fur behind its ears. "You're going to keep me alive. I will pet you. I will feed you this fake warmth, and you are going to stand between me and anyone who tries to hurt me." I was using a feral, brain-damaged creature. I didn't care. I felt absolutely no guilt. The beast exhaled a long, shuddering breath and collapsed heavily beside me, throwing one massive, heavy arm over my legs, caging me in. It was claiming me, but I knew exactly who was holding the chain. "Good boy," I whispered, the words tasting like ash and venom. Suddenly, heavy, careless footsteps echoed down the tunnel. The scent of chewed root and stale sweat cut through the damp air. The beast's eyes snapped open. The pathetic, submissive creature vanished in a fraction of a second. It launched itself up, standing on 2 unnaturally long hind legs, towering over me. The shadows in the cave instantly violently whipped into a frenzy. It let out a roar that wasn't sound. It was a concussive wave of force that made my ears ring and my vision blur. A flickering torch rounded the corner. A man stepped into the light. He was short, built like a brick wall, with streaks of silver in his coarse, messy black hair. He was casually dragging the severed, bloody hindquarter of a cave bear behind him. He didn't flinch at the roaring, eldritch horror towering in front of him. He looked intensely annoyed. He spat a glob of chewed black root onto the cavern floor. He looked at the towering shadow beast, then his eyes flicked past it, landing on my shredded white church robes. His face twisted in utter disgust. "Are you out of your damn mind?" the man snarled, his voice raspy and loud. "I leave you alone for half a day, and you bring church trash into our den?" The beast roared again, taking a threatening step forward, shielding me completely from the man's view. The man didn't step back. He dropped the bear meat with a wet thud and crossed his thick arms. "Shut up, Zarek," Tarnis spat, completely unimpressed. "You can't eat it, and we sure as hell ain't keeping it." Chapter 3. He didn't bring me breakfast. He brought me a slaughter. Something heavy and wet violently hit my lap. I flinched, my spine slamming against the cavern wall. It was the hind leg of a mountain elk, the bone snapped clean, the muscle still twitching. The heavy, suffocating stench of raw iron filled the small space. Zarek loomed over me in the dark. He shoved his scarred snout toward the dripping meat, then snapped his amber eyes to mine. "Eat." The command wasn't spoken. It was violently shoved into my frontal lobe, a jagged, crushing weight that made my teeth ache. I stared at the raw flesh. My stomach violently rebelled. Zarek let out a low, vibrating hum. He nudged the bloody meat closer, his jagged claws scraping against the stone. The shadows bleeding off his fur began to whip chaotically. His lips pulled back, exposing yellowed fangs. He could smell the magic draining me, and his feral brain demanded I refuel. Mine. Feed. I didn't argue. I didn't try to reason with a rabid god. I simply opened my hand, summoning a soft, deceptive pool of golden light. I reached out and pressed my glowing palm against his scarred snout. The terrifying building pressure in the cave instantly collapsed. Zarek flinched, then let out a pathetic, high-pitched whine. His massive, deformed head dropped heavily onto my knee, right beside the bloody elk leg. He closed his eyes, completely submissive to the fake warmth. I kept my breathing perfectly steady, slowly stroking the coarse fur behind his ears. My hand was covered in the elk's blood. I didn't wipe it off. "She's a soft skin, you brain-damaged freak." Tarnis stepped out of the deeper shadows. He wasn't walking normally. His gait was heavy, low to the ground. His thick neck practically fused to his shoulders. His eyes caught the dim light. They weren't human. They were pitch black, flat and soulless like a shark's. He tossed a handful of dry, toxic-smelling roots onto a pile of wood and struck a flint. "Force feed her raw marrow," Tarnis grunted, his voice sounding like two rocks grinding together. "And she'll vomit her own stomach lining. Then you'll spend a month whining over a corpse." Zarek didn't even look up. He just let out a warning rumble that vibrated through my bones, pressing his skull tighter against my stomach. "I'm keeping him calm," I said coldly, my fingers rhythmically tracing the scars on the beast's neck. "You're playing with a loaded siege weapon," Tarnis spat. He skewered a chunk of meat and shoved it into the fire. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me like I was a dead thing that hadn't stopped moving yet. "You think you're holding the leash because you know a few holy parlor tricks." Such pretty lies from a woman wearing a ruined crown. The voice didn't come from Tarnis. It drifted down from the ceiling. I jerked my head up. Hanging upside down from a jagged stalactite was a woman wrapped in a cocoon of dusty, gray moth wings. Her eyes were milky white, completely blind, staring right through me. She dropped to the stone floor. There was no sound of impact, not even a disturbance in the air. Zarek shifted his weight, shielding me with his massive shoulder, but he didn't attack her. "I am Opal," she whispered, her voice breathless and echoing. She floated closer, her wings leaving a trail of fine, sparkling gray dust. She tilted her head, her blind eyes fixed dead center on my glowing hand. "You stroke the collar," Opal mocked gently, a soft giggling sound escaping her lips. "But who is chained, little priestess?" "Get away from me," I warned. She didn't stop. She stopped right at the edge of Zarek's shadow. "He is building a nest. He is keeping you in the dark. You think you are the master, but he is just waiting for you to sleep." "Shut up, Opal," Tarnis snapped, throwing a charred piece of meat onto a metal plate and kicking it across the floor toward me. "Leave the church trash alone. If she dies of fright, he tears the mountain down." I stared at the cooked meat. Opal's words crawled under my skin. I hated this. I hated the smell of the cave, the blind seer, the soulless badger. But suddenly, the hatred was eclipsed by an agonizing, blinding spike of pain. I gasped. My hands violently flew to my abdomen. It wasn't a cramp. It was an explosion. A jagged spike of pure, dark magic erupted from my womb, traveling straight up my spine. The cavern instantly vanished. I was violently pulled backward into a memory. 3 months ago, the locked cell. The air was suffocating. I couldn't see. The church had cast an absolute darkness ward over the room. I was drugged, my limbs paralyzed. But I could smell it. Burning ozone, dried marrow, and centuries of undisturbed, suffocating dust. No, a crushing weight pressed me down against the stone floor. It wasn't an illusion. It was a physical, terrifying mass of heat and coarse wire. In the pitch black of the memory, a rough, violently dry tongue dragged across my collarbone. A jagged psychic pressure slammed into my skull. Mine. Keep. The memory violently snapped. I gasped, my eyes flying open, air tearing into my lungs. I was back in the cave. Cold sweat drenched my ruined robes. Zarek was looming directly over me. His massive, deformed face was inches from mine. His amber eyes were wide, swirling with primal panic. He let out a pathetic whine. Then, he leaned in. His rough, violently dry tongue dragged across my sweat-slicked cheek. My blood froze in my veins. The psychic weight slammed into my mind again, overlapping perfectly, flawlessly, with the memory. Mine. Safe. Zarek dropped his heavy head onto my lap, resting his snout directly against my womb. Beneath his chin, the violent, dark magic inside me stopped thrashing. It purred. It reached out, twisting perfectly into the shadows bleeding off his fur. I stared down at the massive, terrifying beast whining for my touch. I looked at his amber eyes. I smelled the burning ozone. My breath hitched. My hand, still hovering over his head, began to shake violently. I didn't summon the golden light. I violently shoved him away, scrambled backward until my spine hit the rock, and retched dryly onto the stone floor. Chapter 4. The metallic taste of bile coated my tongue. I wiped my mouth with the back of my trembling hand, pressing myself as flat against the freezing stone wall as possible. I couldn't stop staring at him. Zarek sat back on his massive haunches. He didn't look like a nightmare anymore. He looked confused. His terrifying, heavily scarred snout dropped toward the floor. He let out a soft, questioning whine, taking a single, tentative step toward me. "Don't," I choked out. My voice was raw, but the command was absolute. Zarek froze. His amber eyes flickered with a deep, primal hurt. He didn't understand. Minutes ago, I was feeding him the golden warmth of my light. Now, I was looking at him like he was a disease. Because he was. He was the monster in the dark room. He was the father of the parasite twisting inside me. The realization made my skin crawl. "Look at her," Opal whispered from the ceiling, her blind eyes tracking my horror perfectly. "The liar sees the truth, and the truth is so ugly it makes her sick." "Shut up, Opal," I hissed. "What's your problem now?" Tarnis grunted, tossing another root into the fire. He didn't even look at me. "You complain when he feeds you. You complain when he guards you. You church elites are all the same. Useless in the dirt." "You don't understand," I whispered, my chest heaving. "I understand that you're alive because of him," Tarnis snapped back, his black, soulless eyes finally locking onto mine. "He dragged you out of the abyss. He gave you his kill. And you look at him like he's garbage. If you hate him so much, walk out of the cave. See how long you last in the dark." I didn't answer. I couldn't, because Tarnis was right. I was a coward. I hated Zarek, but I needed him to survive. Zarek let out a low, vibrating rumble. It wasn't a threat toward me. It was aimed at the cave entrance. He turned his massive, deformed body toward the dark tunnel, his shadows flaring violently. "Perimeter check," Tarnis ordered, completely unfazed by the beast's sudden aggression. "Go on, Mutt. Make sure the church hounds didn't follow the scent down here." Zarek hesitated. He looked back at me, his amber eyes silently begging for a single touch of the golden light. I deliberately turned my head away. The rejection hit him like a physical blow. He let out a pathetic, jagged sound, then dropped onto all fours and dragged himself out into the suffocating darkness of the tunnels. The moment he was gone, a sharp, piercing frequency drilled directly into my right ear. I gasped, clutching my head. Lysandra. The voice didn't come from the cave. It echoed directly inside my skull. I felt the pulse of your magic, child. You are alive. Malakor. My heart slammed against my ribs. High mage, I whispered. Tarnus stopped chewing. Who are you talking to? I ignored him. I focused entirely on the telepathic link. You tried to kill me. I tried to save the world, Malakor's voice replied. It was perfectly calm, devastatingly rational. But the abyss refused you. The monster caught you. I see it now. This is not a tragedy, Lysandra. This is divine intervention. What are you talking about? The beast is the anchor, the source of the dark rot, Malakor whispered. I could not find its lair, but you are inside it. You have infiltrated the heart of the heresy. I swallowed hard. I am a prisoner. Then let me free you, Malakor offered. The paternal warmth was back in his voice, sweet and suffocating. You do not belong in the mud, Lysandra. You are a high priestess. You belong in the sun. Leave a trail. Use your light. Mark the tunnels. I will bring the vanguard. We will purge the beast, and I swear to you I will safely extract the seed from your womb. You will be cleansed. You will come home. He was offering me my life back. My clean bed. My status. My future. All I had to do was hand over the rabid dog that had just fed me. Don't do it. I snapped my eyes open. Opal was standing right in front of me. Her dusty wings were perfectly still. He is offering you a white dress stained with poison, Opal whispered, her milky eyes wide. The holy man lies. The monster tells the truth. Choose the monster. The monster ruined my life, I hissed at her. The monster caught you when the holy man pushed you, Opal replied softly. I don't care, I snapped, scrambling to my feet. The selfish, ugly instinct inside me took total control. I wanted out. I wanted to be clean again. I am not a mother to a demon, and I am not a pet to a feral beast. I held out my hand. I didn't summon the soft, comforting warmth this time. I summoned sharp, concentrated sparks of holy light. They materialized in my palm like glowing, golden petals. I walked toward the mouth of the tunnel. I dropped the first petal. It hit the stone and flared brilliantly, leaving a permanent, magical beacon. You're a fool, Tarnus growled from the fire. He didn't try to stop me. You think your church is going to welcome you back? They're going to burn you both. They promised me sanctuary, I said coldly, dropping a second petal. And you believed them? Opal giggled. A hollow, terrifying sound. The liar weaves her own noose. I ignored them. I walked deeper into the tunnel, dropping the glowing petals one by one. I was betraying the only creature that had genuinely tried to protect me. I felt the guilt clawing at the back of my throat, but I forced it down. Survival was ugly. I dropped the fifth petal. A massive shadow detached itself from the tunnel wall directly in front of me. I stopped breathing. Zarek hadn't gone on patrol. He had been waiting in the dark. He didn't roar. He didn't tower over me in his terrifying eldritch rage. He was crouched low to the ground, his massive shoulders hunched. He looked down at the glowing petal of holy light by his heavy claws. He sniffed it. He knew exactly what it was. It wasn't the fake, comforting warmth I had fed him. It was a beacon, a signal for the hounds. Slowly, Zarek lifted his deformed, heavily scarred head. He looked at me. There was no violence in his amber eyes. There was no feral madness. There was only a shattered, incomprehensible grief. He understood. He knew I was selling him to the butchers. I stood frozen. I braced myself for the attack. I waited for him to rip my throat out for the betrayal. But Zarek just let out a sound. It was a jagged, wet gasp, the sound of a loyal dog being kicked in the ribs by the owner it loved. He reached down with his massive, terrifying claw. He didn't strike me. He pressed his heavy palm directly over the glowing petal on the stone. The holy magic violently burned his corrupted flesh. It hissed and smoked, the smell of burning meat filling the air. Zarek didn't pull away. He just kept his eyes locked on mine, tears of thick black shadow leaking down his scarred face as he crushed the light until his own blood began to pool on the cold stone floor. Chapter 5. The blood pooling under Zarek's massive claw wasn't red. It was thick, corrupted, and pitch black. He didn't look away from me. He didn't make a move to attack. He just stood there, letting the holy petal burn through his palm, accepting the pain of my betrayal. Then the hounds began to howl. The sound echoed down the tunnel, no longer distant. It was sharp, frenzied, and multiplying. The cavern suddenly flooded with harsh, blinding white light. "They're here," Tarnis growled, kicking dirt over the fire to kill the glow. He didn't run. He pulled a heavy, rusted iron mace from the shadows. "I told you, priestess. You just dug our grave." Opal drifted higher toward the ceiling, her blind eyes wide. "The liar called the wolves. The liar wears a noose." Heavy armored boots slammed against the stone. A dozen vanguard soldiers poured into the cavern. They wore the immaculate silver armor of the church, their weapons drawn and glowing with offensive light magic. "Secure the heretic!" the captain shouted, pointing his blazing sword straight at me. "Kill the beasts." I took a step forward, raising my hands. "Wait, we had a deal. The High Mage promised me." My words were drowned out by a sound that shattered the very air. Zarek didn't cower. He didn't run. The pathetic, heartbroken creature vanished. He rose to his full, terrifying height, standing on two unnaturally long legs. The shadows bleeding off his fur didn't just swirl, they exploded outward. The darkness hit the vanguard soldiers like a physical tidal wave. It wasn't a physical attack. It was absolute psychological warfare. The soldiers stopped dead in their tracks. The glowing light on their weapons flickered and died. The shadows wrapped around their helmets, suffocating their senses, feeding them their worst, most agonizing nightmares. The captain dropped his sword. He fell to his knees, clawing frantically at his own faceplate, screaming in absolute mindless terror. "Get them off! The bugs! Get them out of my eyes!" One by one, the elite soldiers of the church collapsed, sobbing and thrashing against invisible horrors. Zarek hadn't shed a single drop of their blood. He had simply broken their minds. He turned his massive, eldritch form, stepping protectively in front of me. Even after I sold him out, his feral instinct demanded he shield me. "Impressive." A calm voice echoed. The shadows at the tunnel entrance parted, burned away by a presence so bright it made my eyes water. High Mage Malachor stepped into the cavern. He didn't look at his screaming broken soldiers. He didn't look at Zarek. He looked directly at me. "You did well, Lysandra," Malachor said, his voice carrying the sickening warmth of a proud father. "You marked the path perfectly." I pushed past Zarek's massive shoulder, stepping into the dim light. "Take me back. You promised me a safe extraction. You promised me my life." Malachor stopped 10 paces away. He looked at my ruined robes, at the dirt on my face, and then his eyes locked onto my stomach. His warm smile vanished. The absolute, terrifying fanaticism returned. "I promised to cleanse you, child," Malachor said softly. He didn't raise his staff at Zarek. He pulled a ceremonial silver dagger from his belt. "And I will," he continued, taking a slow step forward. "But the rot is too deep. The parasite has merged with your core. To cut it out now would leave a vessel tainted by the dark. The church cannot risk a relapse." My breath hitched. The cavern seemed to spin. "You lied to me. I offered you grace." Malachor's voice finally cracked, booming with terrifying authority. "You were supposed to die on the cliff. You forced my hand. I am sacrificing you to save the world, Lysandra." He slammed his staff into the stone floor. He didn't use a standard spell. He pulled a jagged silver blade across his own palm. He was using blood magic, forbidden, sacrificial light. "Bind the dark," Malachor chanted. 4 pillars of blinding, searing light erupted from the floor, forming a perfect square around Zarek. The holy energy connected, creating a cage of solid, burning divinity. Zarek roared, slamming his massive fists against the bars of light. The impact sent a shockwave through the cave, but the cage held. The holy magic violently burned his corrupted flesh. The sickening smell of roasting meat filled the air. "No!" I screamed, stepping back. "It is over," Malachor said, walking past the burning cage. He raised the silver dagger, his eyes locked onto my womb. "Close your eyes, Lysandra. Let the light take you." He was going to cut me open. He was going to kill my baby. A wave of crushing, suffocating realization hit me. I had thought I was the smart one. I thought I was the predator, manipulating a dumb, feral beast to survive. But I was just a pawn. I had traded the only creature in this abyss who actually cared if I lived or died, for a man who wanted to slaughter me. I looked at Zarek. He was trapped inside the cage of light. His fur was smoking. His flesh was burning. He was screaming not in pain, but in absolute, desperate panic because Malachor was getting closer to me. I'm sorry, I thought, tears of pure, ugly regret finally burning my eyes. I betrayed you. Malachor lunged, thrusting the silver dagger straight for my stomach. A sound cracked through the cavern. It was the sickening, violent snap of thick bone. Malachor froze. I gasped, stumbling backward. We both looked at the cage. Zarek hadn't stopped fighting. The bars of light were too narrow for his massive body, so he forced his right arm through the gap. He shoved his shoulder against the burning holy pillar, letting the magic sear his skin down to the muscle. He let out a jagged, concussive roar, twisting his body violently. Crack. He purposely dislocated and shattered his own shoulder. His right arm hung at a grotesque, unnatural angle. Using the sudden, horrific flexibility of his broken joint, he forced his upper body through the blinding gap of the holy cage. The light ripped his flesh, leaving deep, smoldering gashes across his chest and back. He didn't care. Zarek collapsed onto the stone floor outside the cage, his massive body smoking and bleeding. He couldn't stand. His right arm was completely useless, but he dragged himself forward. He pulled his broken, burning body across the dirt, positioning himself exactly between me and Malachor. The terrifying, eldritch beast from the abyss looked up at the high mage. He didn't have his shadows. He didn't have his intimidating height. But he bared his blood-stained fangs, letting out a deep, earth-shattering snarl that promised absolute murder. He was broken, he was burning, but he was still my shield. Chapter 6. A drop of his blood hit my cheek. It wasn't hot. It was freezing. The second the pitch-black liquid soaked into my skin, the cavern dissolved. The stench of rot vanished, replaced by the overpowering scent of burning incense. I wasn't standing on cold stone. I was kneeling on polished marble inside the grand cathedral. A man stood before the high altar. He wore the immaculate silver armor of the first paladins. His hair was dark, his jaw sharp, and his eyes were a striking, unmistakable amber. He was looking up at a woman chained to a holy pyre. She had my face. "Take the light from me," the paladin commanded. His voice wasn't a roar. It was completely human, heavy with a devastating, absolute devotion. "Give me the abyssal curse. Let her live." "You will lose your mind, Zarek," a faceless high priest warned from the shadows. "You will become a feral thing in the dark, forever." The paladin didn't look away from the woman. "Do it." The memory shattered like glass. I violently gasped, the damp air of the cave rushing back into my lungs. My hands gripped the dirt. I stared at the massive, bleeding beast dragging himself across the floor to shield me. The amber eyes, the scars. He wasn't a random horror from the abyss. He was the first paladin. "You see it now," Malachor's voice cut through the silence. It wasn't a gloat. It was an irritated sigh. A pathetic, centuries-old vow holding back the apocalypse. Malachor stopped pacing. He looked down at Zarek with absolute disgust. He was a locked door, and I needed him broken. The air left my lungs. The puzzle pieces slammed together violently in my brain. The locked room 3 months ago. The absolute darkness. The scent of ozone and dust. "You put me in that room," I whispered, the horror creeping up my throat. I gave a starving, chained dog a taste of his doomed bride, Malachor stated coldly, his face devoid of any guilt. It was the only way to corrupt a paladin's core. He broke his holy vow the moment he planted that seed in you. The curse is eating him alive from the inside now. When that thing in your womb takes its first breath, he dies. I stopped breathing. I looked at Zarek. He didn't understand the words. His feral brain couldn't comprehend the conspiracy. He only knew the man in white held a weapon. He let out a jagged, wet snarl, dragging his massive, ruined body another inch forward, keeping himself perfectly between me and the blade. I looked at my own hands. My palms were still glowing faintly with the fake, deceptive light I had used to manipulate him. I used him. The realization ripped me apart. I had cursed him. I had fed him lies. I had traded him to the executioners to get my clean life back. And all this time, he had been decaying in the dark for my bloodline. Even after I sold him, he had shattered his own shoulder just to take another hit for me. My stomach violently heaved. The self-loathing was so absolute it tasted like acid. "It's over," Malachor said, his voice hardening into fanatic resolve. He didn't use the dagger. He raised his staff. The air in the cavern instantly violently condensed. A massive, blinding spear of pure, lethal divinity materialized above him, scorching the ceiling with its heat. The lock is broken, the heretic dies, the world stays clean. Malachor violently hurled the spear. It moved with terrifying speed, aimed directly at Zarek's chest. Zarek saw it coming. He tried to rise, to push his massive chest forward to absorb the lethal blow, but his right arm, the arm he had broken to escape the cage for me, violently gave out. He collapsed onto the stone. He let out a pathetic, shattered whine. He didn't look at the spear. He looked back at me. His amber eyes were wide, filled with a devastating, silent apology. He thinks he failed me. The selfish, calculating survivor inside me simply died. I didn't think. I didn't scream. I pushed off the cold stone with every ounce of strength I had left. I didn't run for the tunnel. I threw myself violently forward, right into his massive, shadowy chest. Zarek's eyes widened in pure, terrified shock. "Lysandra!" Tarnis screamed. I wrapped my arms around the beast's neck, burying my face in his coarse, burning fur. The impact shattered the air. It didn't hit him. The spear of pure light struck me dead center in the back. Chapter 7. The holy spear didn't burn. It felt like absolute, paralyzing ice. It pierced my back and shattered the magic in my core. I didn't even scream. The air was violently ripped from my lungs. The world tilted, and I collapsed hard onto the cold stone floor. Lysandra. Tarnis's roar sounded miles away, muffled like I was underwater. I lay on my side. My vision was rapidly graying out, the edges of the cavern dissolving into static. But I could see him. I could see Zarek. He wasn't moving. The pathetic, broken beast whining on the floor was gone. He just stared at my body. He stared at the holy light fading from the wound in my back. Something inside him snapped. It wasn't a feral rage. It was the silent, devastating collapse of a centuries-old dam. The cavern stopped vibrating. The air went entirely still. Then, a violent, seismic quake tore through the earth. The shadows bleeding from his fur didn't just whip around him, they exploded. The absolute darkness of the weeping abyss answered his grief, flooding the cavern and suffocating the torches. Zarek stood up. He didn't hunch, he didn't crawl, he didn't drag his shattered arm. The first paladin rose to his full, towering height on two legs. The darkness violently coiled around him, hardening into a massive, jagged suit of abyssal armor. He was no longer a rabid dog of the dark. He was its sovereign. The vanguard soldiers stumbled backward, their holy weapons flickering violently against the crushing pressure in the room. "Hold the line!" the captain screamed, his voice cracking with pure, unfiltered terror. "Bring the demon down!" They charged, raising their blazing swords. Zarek didn't roar. He didn't bar his fangs or lung. He simply raised one armored hand. The darkness swept forward like a tidal wave. There was no sound of tearing flesh, no screaming, no blood. The shadows simply washed over the dozen elite soldiers. When the darkness pulled back a split second later, they were gone. Erased, wiped entirely from existence. Only their empty, scorched silver armor clattered onto the stone floor, echoing in the dead silence. Malachor dropped his staff. The high mage stumbled backward, hitting the cavern wall. His immaculate white robes trembled. The terrifying, fanatic confidence completely drained from his face, replaced by a primal, suffocating dread. He stared at the empty armor on the floor, his mind unable to process the absolute annihilation. "Abomination," Malachor choked out. Zarek ignored him. The sovereign of the abyss dropped to his knees beside me. The abyssal armor shifted, softening as he carefully, desperately pulled me into his massive chest. I looked up at his face. The feral madness in his amber eyes was completely gone. They were clear. They were human. They held the devastating, crushing weight of a man who had sacrificed his eternity, only to watch his reason for living die all over again. I reached up with a trembling, numb hand. My fingers brushed against the cold shadow of his jaw. "I'm sorry," I whispered. A ragged, wet gasp escaped his throat. He buried his face in my ruined hair, holding me so tightly I thought my ribs would snap. "How touching." Malachor's voice scraped through the cavern. Half of the high mage's lower body was already being consumed by the lingering shadows, but he didn't scream. He was smiling. A A psychotic, victorious smile. "You wiped out my vanguard, monster, but you are too late," Malachor coughed, spitting dark blood onto his own white robes. The spear wasn't just pure light. It was laced with cleansing bane. The ultimate purge. I felt it then. The numbness spreading through my veins wasn't just shock. I looked down at my hand resting against Zarek's chest. My fingers were turning translucent. Gray, sparkling ash began to violently flake from my skin, drifting upward into the cold air. "The heretic and the parasite," Malachor laughed, his voice echoing madly as the shadows finally swallowed his throat. "They are turning to dust in your arms, Paladin. The world is saved. I won." Malachor vanished into the dark, leaving only his insane laughter echoing off the walls. I looked back up at Zarek. My vision was completely failing. My body felt weightless. The violent magic of the baby inside me was fading into absolute silence. "Let me go," I whispered, my voice blowing away like ash in the wind. "It's over." Chapter 8. I was turning to ash. It didn't hurt. That was the most terrifying part. The poison from the spear simply erased me. My fingers, resting against Zarek's massive chest, were already gray dust, dissolving into the freezing cavern air. Zarek let out a sound that broke the silence. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a snarl. It was a sob. The sovereign of the abyss, the terrifying monster that had just wiped a dozen elite soldiers from existence, was weeping. He pulled me tighter against him, his massive hands trembling as if he could physically hold my molecules together. "Stop," I whispered, my voice sounding hollow, like wind through dry leaves. "It's okay." He didn't listen. Zarek violently tore away the abyssal armor covering his right arm. He slammed his bare, heavily scarred palm directly over the gaping wound in my chest. A blinding, pitch-black energy violently erupted from his skin. It wasn't a shadow. It was solid, terrifyingly dense power. "Mutt! Don't!" "Mutt!" Tarnus roared from the other side of the cavern, dropping his rusted mace. "If you give her your core, you're dead. There's no coming back from that. You won't even be a ghost." Zarek didn't even look at him. He pushed the dark energy directly into my shattered chest. The numbness vanished. A violent, searing heat flooded my veins. The ashing process violently halted. The gray dust on my skin froze, held in place by the sheer, overwhelming force of his life essence. But I felt him fading. The massive, terrifying beast holding me was losing his density. His physical form flickered. The eternal fire in his amber eyes began to dim. He was pouring his entire existence, his centuries of agonizing survival, directly into my dying heart. "No," I choked out. I tried to push his arm away, but my hands were too weak. "Zarek, stop! I don't want it. Stop!" He held my hand down. He leaned his deformed, scarred face inches from mine. Then, he opened his mouth. His throat hadn't formed human words in centuries. The sound was ragged, grinding, and raw. I waited. I stopped fighting. My breath hitched. 1,000 years, Zarek rasped, tears of black shadow tracking down his snout. "In the dark, just to hear you say my name." He smiled, a broken, genuinely happy smile. "Live." He closed his eyes and violently shoved the last remaining pulse of his core into my chest. His body began to collapse. He was perfectly happy to die, as long as I breathed. Hell, no. The selfish survivor inside me had died. The obedient high priestess was gone. But a mother and a mate woke up in their place. I grabbed his massive wrist. I didn't push it away. I dug my nails in. "I am not living in the dark without you," I snarled. I didn't push his darkness out. I reached deep into my own shattered core. Malachor's spear hadn't completely destroyed my light. It had only buried it in poison. Light and dark were supposed to destroy each other. That was the absolute law of the church. I broke the law. I forced my dying golden light to violently wrap around his pitch-black core. I fused them together. The pain was absolute. It felt like my spine was splitting open. "Lysandra!" Tarnus shielded his eyes as a blinding shockwave ripped through the cavern. The light wasn't golden. It wasn't black. It was eclipse. A brilliant, terrifying silver-black fire erupted from our joined bodies. The cleansing bane poison in my blood was instantly vaporized. The ash on my skin violently reversed, binding back into solid, breathing flesh. The eclipse magic blasted outward. It hit the empty vanguard armor and Malakor's lingering ashes, incinerating them into absolute nothingness. The cavern walls cracked under the sheer pressure of a new, unholy divinity. I gasped, violently arching my back as the new power settled into my bones. Beside me, Zarek collapsed onto the stone. He was violently gasping for air. He was alive. The eclipse had rebounded, tethering our souls together in an unbreakable, corrupted bond. But the massive magic surge had an immediate, violent consequence. A new wave of pain hit me. It wasn't the sharp bite of a spear. It was low, heavy, and undeniable. My water broke. I let out a ragged, terrified scream, my hands instantly flying to my swollen stomach. Opal dropped from the ceiling, her dusty wings fluttering frantically. The eclipse rises. The child demands the dark. I gritted my teeth, gripping Zarek's arm so hard my knuckles turned white. I looked past the beast, my eyes glowing with the residual silver-black fire. "Tarnus!" I screamed, the sound echoing through the crumbling abyss. "Get over here!" Chapter 9. "Get your hands off her, you feral freak!" Tarnus hit the stone floor sliding. He shoved Zarek's massive shoulder, reaching for my bleeding legs. Zarek didn't just push back, he snapped. The sovereign of the abyss vanished. The rabid, starving beast violently clawed its way back to the surface. Zarek let out a deafening, ear-splitting roar, his jagged claws violently pinning Tarnus to the cavern floor. His amber eyes were completely dilated, swallowed by feral blackness. The smell of my blood was destroying his fragile, newly formed sanity. "Zarek!" I screamed, the contraction violently ripping my spine in half. I didn't try to reason with him. I grabbed his forearm and dug my nails directly into his fresh burn wounds. The pain snapped his attention back. He flinched, dropping Tarnus. He crawled toward my head, his chest heaving violently, his teeth bared in an uncontrollable, shivering snarl. He wasn't a gentle anchor. He was a monster barely holding onto a leash. "The magic is blocking the exit," Tarnus choked out, scrambling backward to my knees. "The eclipse fire. She's literally burning from the inside out." I arched my back, screaming as a wave of silver-black fire erupted from my skin. Zarek didn't hesitate. He grabbed my burning hands. "Mine." The psychic weight violently slammed into my skull. He didn't gently pull the magic. He violently inhaled it. He ripped the unstable eclipse fire out of my core and dragged it into his own veins. The reaction was horrific. Zarek's massive body violently convulsed. The silver-black fire didn't just burn him, it mutated him. His skin cracked open like dry earth, leaking blinding light. He threw his head back, letting out a jagged, agonizing shriek that sounded like tearing metal. He looked down at me, his eyes wide and chaotic. For a split second, he didn't look at me with love. He looked at me with absolute, ravenous hunger. He was losing his mind. "Push, priestess!" Tarnus roared, his hands covered in my blood. "Now!" I didn't close my eyes. I kept my gaze locked onto the terrifying, breaking monster holding my hands, and I pushed with every ounce of terrifying dark strength I had left. The cavern walls didn't just shake, they fractured. A concussive wave of silence violently blew out the remaining torches. Then it was over. I collapsed against the stone, gasping for air. My vision swam. The suffocating heat vanished. I waited for the cry. I waited for the loud, triumphant scream of life. It never came. Absolute heavy silence smothered the cave. "Tarnus?" I whispered, panic turning my blood to ice. "Why is it quiet?" Tarnus didn't answer. He was kneeling between my legs, perfectly still. He slowly looked up at me. His soulless, black eyes were wide with a sickening dread. He held a tiny, unmoving bundle in his bloody hands. "It's not breathing," Tarnus rasped. The words hit me like a physical execution. No. I tried to sit up, but my body was completely paralyzed by exhaustion. "Give it to me. Let me heal it." "There's no heartbeat, Lysandra," Tarnus whispered, lowering his head. "I'm sorry." Zarek didn't mourn. The beast didn't let out a cry of grief. He violently dropped my hands. He scrambled across the floor, his movements entirely insectoid and unnerving. He shoved Tarnus backward with a devastating blow and ripped the silent bundle from the badger shifter's hands. "Zarek, no!" I sobbed, reaching for the air. "Don't hurt it." He didn't listen. He laid the tiny, gray, unmoving body on the cold stone. He raised his right hand. He didn't summon magic. He extended his longest, sharpest claw and violently sliced his own throat. Pitch black, corrupted abyssal blood welled from the wound. Zarek leaned over. He let a single, heavy drop of absolute darkness fall directly onto the dead infant's pale lips. A forced, unholy baptism. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a sound cracked through the cavern. It wasn't a baby's cry. It was a jagged, mechanical grinding sound, like tectonic plates shifting. The ambient temperature in the cave violently plummeted to freezing. The child gasped. Tarnus violently clutched his head, blood suddenly leaking from his nose as the eldritch frequency of the child's first breath pierced the air. Zarek pulled back, his chest heaving. I dragged my broken body forward. I reached out and pulled the child into my arms. She was freezing. Her skin felt like solid ice. She didn't seek my warmth, she actively consumed it. Slowly, the child opened her eyes. There was no white, there was no innocent heterochromia. Both of her eyes were pitch-black voids, surrounded by a violently burning, bleeding silver ring, a perfect, terrifying total eclipse. Opal drifted down from the ceiling. She didn't smile this time. She looked terrified. "The end of days," the blind seer whispered, backing away into the shadows. "The lock is broken, and the key is born." I stared down at the eldritch horror wrapped in a bloody coat. I looked at the terrifying, bleeding monster hovering protectively over us. Malachor was right. I wasn't a victim. I hadn't survived a tragedy. I had orchestrated a cosmic disaster. I had birthed the parasite that would eat the world, just to save my own life. I stroked the freezing, ash-pale cheek of the monster I had created. A cold, ugly smile slowly spread across my face. "Let the world burn," I thought, pulling the darkness against my chest. "We will rule the ashes."